About 7 years ago, I was in the midst of my eternal millennial adolescence, traveling around Europe, living in cheap hostels, doing odd jobs here and there. My journey took me to Denmark, where I missed the last train at night and was stuck at the station. As I was wandering around aimlessly, two Danish girls randomly struck up a conversation with me for whatever reason, and they offered to show me around the city as I was going to be stuck there for some time anyways. I agreed, but I explained my situation was that I was a broke traveler and I wouldn't be able to go out to eat anywhere, especially not at a restaurant where I'd have to tip the waiter. They looked a bit surprised at first, and then they explained that tipping culture doesn't really exist in Denmark. It's purely optional. Now, of course, if you feel like you really received exceptional customer service, you certainly can leave a tip if you want to, but there's zero obligation to do so, financially or morally. Now, as a still somewhat ignorant American, I was a bit confused about this. Denmark, though not quite as expensive as America, was certainly not cheap either, especially after I had just spent months traveling in Eastern Europe in the time prior. How exactly were waiters able to make a living if they weren't receiving tips? Well, it turns out the answer is actually ridiculously simple. It turns out that their employer, the restaurant, actually pays them enough to earn a living. I know this idea sounds radically communist by American standards, but it's really just good common business sense when you think about it. I'm going to be approaching this from a pure capitalist business economic standpoint. I'm not going to be making moral speeches about equality or anything like that. You've heard those arguments 100 times already. The biggest argument you always hear against the minimum wage is that businesses can't afford it. Now, this isn't necessarily true. It's really just surface level slop analysis. Nobody who makes this argument has seriously studied the publicly available finances and earnings reports these businesses are required to file. If you actually study them in depth, you'll see that most of them are not getting pushed to their limits profit margin wise, and that they could pay their employees more, they just choose not to. Now, if you want to argue that it's their right as business owners to pay their workers less, fine. But there's a big problem with this. You see, critics of the minimum wage will say that if you force businesses to pay their employees a certain amount, they will then have no choice but to raise prices to compensate, and the cost will get passed on to the consumer in the end. But my experience in Denmark taught me that this is going to happen just the same, even more so, without a minimum wage. We ended up finding a decent cheap restaurant, and as I was looking at the prices, there was a real peace of mind unlike anything I had experienced in America, knowing that the price I saw on the menu was exactly what I'd be expected to pay. I wasn't going to be hit with a massive, unexpected gratuity bill. I wasn't going to be looked at weird or judged for tipping an amount that wasn't considered acceptable by subjective standards. And in this moment, I realized something very profound. Corporations and employers are the true freeloaders, parasites, and welfare recipients in American society. Since they refuse to pay their employees enough to make a living, well, somebody has to. And well, now the cost gets passed on to the consumer via America's insane tipping culture. It's quite ironic, isn't it? These broke, loser, unprofitable corporations can't pay their workers enough to make a living, and so now the rest of society has to subsidize their cheap labor. People need to earn enough to make a living, not just for the sake of dignity or morals, but because you actually have to be alive in order to work and contribute to the economy. It's a bit hard to contribute if you're homeless and or starving to death. So, if employers are not willing to pay the bare minimum required to live, well, somebody does. And tipping culture is just the tip of the iceberg here. No pun intended. Most minimum wage workers are essential workers, people who are doing jobs that society would collapse without. Now, if you're a pure free market capitalist and you want to say that the free market has determined that their wage isn't worth $20 an hour, you can certainly make that argument. You can even argue that they deserve to go homeless and starve to death because they're unskilled. And let's just be honest, most capitalists do ultimately believe this. They just don't have the balls to say it out loud. Now, I'm not going to rebut this with moral arguments about why homelessness and starvation are bad, because I know that capitalists don't have morals. My question for them is this: if all these essential workers, farmers, grocery store workers, trash collectors, go homeless and starve to death, how do you plan to keep society from collapsing? Well, the answer is you can't. Society needs these workers to even keep existing. but the broke loser corporations that employ them refuse to pay them enough for a living. And so the end result is that somebody else has to subsidize their cheap exploitation labor. In the case of restaurants, the rest of us have to pay via America's insane tipping culture. In the case of fast food, grocery store, and other essential workers, these workers clearly don't make enough to pay for these insane modern rent prices. And so for most of them, despite working over 40 hours a week, they either still have to live with their parents or receive food stamps and other government benefits just to make ends meet. And at last, we arrive at the grand irony of this all. Because these broke, loser, unprofitable corporations can't pay for their own business expensive labor, well, the rest of us now have to subsidize them. Taxpayers have to subsidize their food stamps. Their families have to offer them financial support. We have to pay insane, subjective tipping rates instead of a transparent flat price because restaurants can't pay for their own labor costs. And hilariously, as every opponent of the minimum wage says, the cost now ends up getting passed on to the consumer. A far bigger cost. I thought we lived in a society where we hate collectivism and communism so much. So why is the collective community now being asked to subsidize the business expensive labors that corporations should be responsible for paying themselves? Hey guys, so I'm on a mission and I need your help. You see, I've made it the purpose of this channel to defend Gen Z from all these nasty, delusional Gen Z haters. And I've just realized we're starting to get close to taking down the most despicable one yet, the angry guy. This guy is not just another delusional old fart calling Gen Z lazy. He's literally had videos where he openly celebrates Gen Z suffering and even dying. He's just straight up a terrible human being. Now, thankfully, his channel is rapidly dying and we are rapidly gaining ground on him as we speak. So, if you're new here and enjoying this content, definitely consider subscribing and helping us take down the biggest Gen Z hater out there. The current goal is to surpass him in subscribers by the end of summer. With your help, we can absolutely do this. Part 2. We don't have real capitalism. We have corporatism. This isn't real capitalism. This is corporatism. If you follow my channel, you'll know that these types of comments pop up in just about every video. It's a bit hypocritical how it's literally illegal to say that's not real socialism, but everything wrong with capitalism can just easily be explained away by that's not real capitalism. Anyways, not going to get into that too much here. Let's say I grant you this argument. Unfortunately, there's a bigger problem with this logic, a much bigger problem. You see, if it is indeed true that we live under corporatism and not capitalism, well then the entire success story of capitalism was the biggest lie in human history, because that would then mean that it wasn't capitalism that lifted billions of people out of poverty either. It was corporatism. South Korea is often touted as the poster boy of the incredible wonder of capitalism. It's a capitalist wet dream. After the effective ending of the Korean War in 1953, the communist North went along with its Soviet allies, and the capitalist South opened itself up to American capitalism. The rest is history, right? The North is an absolute authoritarian communist hellscape today. The South rapidly industrialized and prospered. 70 years ago, these countries were not all that far apart. Today, they couldn't be more different. This is indisputable proof of the wonders of capitalism, right? There's only one slight problem with this. Well, not a slight problem, a big one. The success story of South Korea was largely due to Samsung. This is an undisputed historical fact. The South Korean economy to this day is heavily reliant on Samsung. Some have even said an attack on Samsung is an attack on South Korea itself. They are the epitome dictionary definition of too big to fail. It's pretty safe to say that South Korea would not have seen such incredible growth and progress if Samsung didn't exist. But Samsung itself was not a private corporation. Far from it, actually. Samsung started out as nothing more than a small trading company selling basic groceries like noodles and dried fish. The founder of Samsung, Lee Byung-chul, was already a well-known and established figure in Korean business circles. The government saw him as a valuable ally as he was loyal and competent. After the devastation of the Korean War, South Korea was one of the poorest and most underdeveloped countries in the whole world. The president at the time, Syngman Lee, wanted to rebuild and industrialize fast, and he quickly realized that there was no way he could do that with a true free market. And so he came up with a plan. Hand over the reins of the economy to a few loyal businessmen like the founder of Samsung, let them rebuild it, and back them with infinite amounts of government protections and subsidies to a point where smaller competitors could no longer reasonably compete. In the 60s and 70s, the Korean government wanted to direct Samsung into the rapidly growing textile and sugar industry, and they specifically wanted Samsung to be the dominant player here. So, they completely undermined the free market in order to make that happen. They placed insanely high tariffs on imported sugars and textiles, which made it impossible for foreign companies to compete. They then allowed Samsung to import textile machinery duty-free while blocking their competitors from doing the same. This prevented domestic companies from being able to compete, and this is only the beginning of the sheer amount of free stuff Samsung got from the government. In the same 1960s era, the Korean government took over the banking sector, nationalizing the banks. After they did this, they funneled extremely cheap loans, far below market level interest rates, to Samsung. This allowed Samsung to scale rapidly without even having to worry about actually turning a profit. Later on, as Samsung entered the electronics industry we all know them for today, the government gave them even more free stuff. The government subsidized their international shipping costs with taxpayer money. They even fully reimbursed their costs for building research and development facilities. And to this very day, the government continues to spend billions upon billions of taxpayer money to build infrastructure like roads and ports specifically designed to be favorable to Samsung. There are entire industrial zones like Suwon and Gumi that were custom made to be tailored to Samsung's needs. With how heavily the government was involved in the success of Samsung, you could literally call it a state-planned business, aka socialism at this point. Gen Z is so lazy and naive for wanting free healthcare and UBI. Nothing is free in this world. The problem with socialism is eventually you run out of other people's money. Oh yeah? So then please explain how you capitalist shills magically make billions upon billions upon billions of dollars of free stuff magically appear out of thin air to fund your own unprofitable businesses. Yeah, somehow blaming Gen Z for living with their parents or wanting universal basic income is absolutely hilarious at this point when your own corporations that you ass, kiss, and worship all day receive literally billions of times more free stuff. Okay, but this is Samsung, a South Korean company. This has nothing to do with America, right? Here in America, surely our governments and corporations are good people and don't do the exact same thing, right?
You serious?
No, but it's really cute that you think that. Part 3. You're a YouTuber complaining about capitalism. How ironic. Okay, so let's break this down a bit. Who owns YouTube actually? Google, right? This is pretty common knowledge by now. Google would not exist without the internet, right? We can all agree on this, right? Okay, good. Google Maps, a key feature Google relies on for its business model, relies on GPS, right? We can all agree on this, right? Okay, good. And Google Search is what started Google itself entirely, right? Good. Glad we all agree on these indisputable facts. Okay, pop quiz time. What does the internet, GPS, and Google Search all have in common? The answer is that none of them were invented, funded, or developed by Google itself. All of these technologies were in fact invented by DARPA, an American military agency purely funded by taxpayers. In the 1990s, Google founders Larry Page and Sergey Brin were just a couple of PhD students at Stanford. Their research into search engine algorithms was purely funded by grants from DARPA and the NSF, $4.5 million to be exact. These were full-on, 100% free, no strings attached grants, not loans where they'd eventually have to pay them back, just cold hard cash and free money. Millions of dollars of free money.
But I thought these corporate shills always say that nothing is free.
Exactly, Chris. Now you see how the actual actions of corporate shills never match their words. Conclusion. Okay, I want to finish this off by zooming out and analyzing all this with a deeper layer of nuance. You see, all too often when I bring this up, corporate shills will defend themselves by saying, hey, I'm against corporate welfare too. But here's the problem with that logic. Just about every successful corporation needed some level of government assistance to start up and eventually thrive. It takes money to make money. Everybody knows this. They often try to defend capitalism by saying we don't live under true capitalism.
You mean they're saying that real capitalism hasn't been tried yet? Boy, why does that sound so familiar?
Exactly, Chris. But here's the thing. If real capitalism has never been tried, that also means real capitalism has never worked. And that's because it can't work. Because in order to build a successful corporation, you can't be starting from zero. Governments and businessmen themselves know this, which is why they gave and continue to give Google, Samsung, and every other big corporation billions of dollars of free stuff. And as much as we might lament how unfair and uncapitalist it was that the government gave them so much free stuff, the economic miracle of South Korea probably doesn't happen without Samsung. And none of us would be on this platform with this unprecedented opportunity to connect with each other if it weren't for Google. None of this is to defend corporations in any way, shape, or form, but since they themselves benefited so much off billions of dollars of free government money themselves, they absolutely owe us a universal basic income as a compensation. And even they themselves know this, as the founder of Google, Larry Page, himself is on record as being in favor of universal basic income. And the last thing I have to say for this video is this. Checkmate, corporate chills. I've made a lot of great arguments for universal basic income, but I'm just going to gloat a little bit and say that this was probably my best one yet. I really don't see how you're going to argue this at this point. The last argument I could potentially see them making is, well, maybe they got billions of dollars of free stuff, but at least they did something productive with it. But this is equally, if not even more true for individuals receiving UBI as well. A recent 3-year UBI study in Germany just concluded where it was determined that UBI recipients not only did not quit their jobs as UBI critics thought they would, they actually worked more, improved their work, or invested in their education going back to school. We cover the study more in this video right here. Check it out. I'll see you there. Thanks for watching.